A military helicopter does not land in a hospital parking lot at sunset, unless someone is dying or someone irreplaceable is about to be lost forever. The rotor wash from the Black Hawk sent debris swirling across the asphalt of St. Michael's Hospital, forcing staff members to shield their faces. Visitors pressed against windows, phones out, recording in disbelief. But the soldiers pouring out in tactical gear weren't responding to a terror threat. They weren't evacuating dignitaries. A commander with silver eagles on his uniform and a jaw carved from granite sprinted toward the emergency exit, his voice cutting through the mechanical thunder. "Find Nurse Rosario." "Where is Aurelia Rosario?" When a security guard pointed toward a woman walking down the sidewalk with a cardboard box, the commander grabbed his radio. "Castellanos to command. We have visual. Intercepting target now." He turned to his team. "Tell operations we're bringing the Guardian back." The overhead lights of St. Michael's Hospital emergency department buzzed with a persistent electrical hum that trauma nurse Aurelia Rosario had stopped noticing after 8 years on the night shift. It was 1:47 a.m. The dead zone between the midnight chaos of bar fights and the pre-dawn heart attacks. But tonight, the ER crackled with a different energy. All of it centered on Trauma Bay 3. Aurelia adjusted the oxygen mask on the unconscious man's face, her trained eyes scanning the monitors. He had arrived 40 minutes ago via ambulance. No identification, no emergency contact, just combat fatigues and boots worn smooth at the heels. The paramedics said they'd found him collapsed outside a warehouse on the industrial side of town. His vitals were catastrophic. Temperature, 105.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Heart rate, 142 and irregular. Blood pressure dropping, and across his torso, under layers of tactical gear, were burns that didn't match any civilian accident. "These aren't chemical burns from a factory," Aurelia murmured, cleaning the wounds with careful precision. "These are nerve agent exposure patterns." She'd seen similar injuries during her volunteer rotation with Doctors Without Borders. This man wasn't some random vagrant. He was military, special operations if she had to guess, and someone had tried to kill him. "Nurse Rosario." The voice sliced through the trauma bay like a blade. Aurelia looked up to see Dr. Harrison Whitmore striding in, his white coat pristine despite the hour. The medical director was a man who measured success in budget spreadsheets and liability reduction, not lives saved. "Yes, Dr. Whitmore." Aurelia kept her tone professional, though her stomach tightened. "Why is this unidentified individual occupying a trauma bay?" Whitmore's gaze swept over the patient with visible disdain. He tapped his tablet screen. "No insurance verification. No patient history, no next of kin. We have ambulances being diverted because we're at capacity. Transfer him to County General." Aurelia straightened, meeting his eyes. "Dr. Whitmore, he's in toxic shock. His organs are shutting down. If we move him in this condition, he dies in the ambulance. That's not our concern." Whitmore stepped closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "You're a nurse, Rosario. You follow protocols. You follow my orders. This hospital cannot afford the liability of treating unknown combatants who might be involved in criminal activity." "He's a patient," Aurelia said firmly, "and I think he's one of ours. Look at the service tattoo on his forearm. That's a Special Operations Unit insignia. He needs aggressive intervention now." Whitmore's jaw clenched. "You have 30 minutes to stabilize him for transport. If he's still here when I return, it won't be him who's removed from this hospital. It will be you." He turned sharply, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Aurelia looked down at the soldier. His hand moved suddenly, gripping the bed rail with desperate strength. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, but searching. "Easy," she whispered, placing her hand over his. "I've got you. You're safe." She knew the rules. She understood the chain of command. She also knew that following Whitmore's order was murder by bureaucracy. She checked the wall clock. 2:03 a.m. Whitmore wouldn't check on her until morning rounds at 6:30 a.m. Aurelia made her choice. Instead of arranging transport, she moved the patient to a corner bay behind privacy curtains, a space technically designated for supply overflow. She overrode the automated medication dispensary, pulling high-grade antibiotics and experimental antitoxin treatments that required director approval. She sat beside him, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath, sponging his forehead as his fever raged. Reyes to Overwatch. Position compromised. Need immediate extraction. The soldier groaned in his delirium, his body tensing. You're at Street Michael's, Aurelia said softly. I'm Aurelia. You're not alone. For 4.5 hours, she fought death in that curtained corner. She called in favors from other nurses, asking them to cover her other patients. She ignored policy, ignored protocols, ignored everything except the numbers on the monitors. At 6:12 a.m., his fever finally broke. His heart rate stabilized. His eyes opened, sharp and gray as gunmetal, instantly alert despite his weakened state. Where? His voice was rough gravel. Street Michael's Hospital. You were in severe toxic shock. Aurelia poured water into a cup. Dr. Whitmore wanted you transferred. I kept you here. The soldier studied her face with unsettling intensity, as if committing every detail to memory. You disobeyed orders. For me, you would have died. She handed him the water. That's not acceptable. Before he could respond, the curtain ripped open with a screech of metal rings. Dr. Whitmore stood there, his face flushed with fury. Behind him, 2 security officers hovered awkwardly. I warned you, Rosario. Whitmore's voice shook with rage. You stole medication. You falsified dispensary records. You deliberately defied a direct order from the medical director. He pointed at her badge. You're terminated. Effective immediately. He's alive, Aurelia said, standing between Whitmore and the patient. His vitals are stable. The treatment worked. I don't care if you raised Lazarus, Whitmore shouted. You're done. Badge. Now. Aurelia unclipped her hospital badge. She removed the stethoscope from around her neck, the one her father had carried for 20 years as a firefighter paramedic, and placed it on the bedside table. She turned to the soldier. Don't let them move you until you're ready. Drink water, fight. The soldier said nothing, but his gaze never left Whitmore. His hand moved subtly under the blanket, fingers tapping a pattern against his thigh as if sending Morse code. Out, Whitmore barked. Aurelia grabbed her purse and walked out of Trauma Bay 3, her head high but her heart splintering. 8 years of service, hundreds of lives saved, countless nights sacrificed, gone in minutes, because she refused to let a man die. The automatic doors of the emergency department slid open, and the early morning air hit her like ice water. It was drizzling, a cold, penetrating rain that immediately soaked through her scrubs. She realized she'd left her jacket in her locker. She wasn't allowed back inside to retrieve it. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the building that had been her second home. Street Michael's had been her purpose. She'd missed her father's last birthday inside those walls, too busy saving someone else's father. She'd celebrated her 30th birthday in the break room with stale donuts, and now she was banned from entering. She checked her pockets, wallet, phone, keys to a car that was in the shop with a blown transmission. She'd taken the bus to work. The Sunday bus schedule didn't start until 8 a.m. It was 6:47 a.m. Perfect, she whispered bitterly, wiping rain from her face. Her apartment was nearly 5 miles away, a 5-mile walk along the frontage road in the rain, still wearing her scrubs and nursing clogs. She grabbed a small cardboard box that security had brought out. Inside, a framed photo of her father in his firefighter uniform, a coffee mug that said Trauma Queen, and a plant she'd kept alive for 3 years. She started walking. Her clogs squelched against the wet pavement. Cars passed, spraying gutter water onto her legs. The box grew heavier with each block. As the adrenaline faded, the fear crept in. How would she pay rent? Who would hire a nurse terminated for theft and insubordination? Whitmore had the power to destroy her career with a single phone call to the state licensing board. She was 3 blocks from the hospital when she heard it, a deep, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through her chest. She stopped, looking up. A military helicopter was descending toward Street Michael's parking lot, rotors slicing through the morning mist. Aurelia's breath caught. Behind her, she heard shouting, boots pounding on pavement. She turned to see soldiers in full tactical gear sprinting toward her, led by a commander whose uniform marked him as someone who gave orders, not took them. Aurelia Rosario? The commander shouted over the helicopter noise. She nodded, too stunned to speak. The commander grabbed his radio. Castellanos to command. Package. Located. Initiating retrieval. He looked at Aurelia, and for the first time in hours, she saw something other than contempt in someone's eyes. She saw respect, urgency, desperation. Ma'am, you need to come with us. Right now. Lieutenant Reyes is dying, and you're the only person who can save him. Before we dive into how Aurelia's nightmare became her greatest moment of courage, if you're following this story, let us know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever stood up against authority to do what was right, even when it cost you everything? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is just getting started, and what happens next will leave you speechless. We share stories about the invisible heroes among us, the medical professionals who risk everything for their patients, the soldiers who serve in silence, and the moments when moral courage defeats institutional corruption. Comment Guardian below if you believe that every life is worth fighting for, regardless of who's watching or what it costs. The ambulance bay doors crashed open at 1:47 a.m., bringing with it a gust of cold autumn wind and two paramedics pushing a gurney at a dead sprint. Aurelia Rosario looked up from the medication cart, her instincts firing before her mind fully processed the scene. The patient was massive, easily 200 pounds of solid muscle, unconscious and covered in a thin film of sweat that made his skin gleam under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What have we got?" Aurelia called out, already moving toward Trauma Bay 3. Male, approximately 35, found collapsed outside an industrial warehouse on Riverside. The lead paramedic gasped, his uniform soaked with rain. No ID, no wallet, no phone. Vitals are crashing. BP 70/40 and dropping. Heart rate 142. Temp is 105.3. Aurelia's hands were already cutting away the man's clothing, revealing a torso mapped with scars that told stories of violence survived. But it was the burns that made her pause. They weren't typical thermal injuries. The skin showed chemical erosion patterns, blistering that radiated outward in geometric precision, concentrated around his chest and neck. "These aren't industrial accident burns," she muttered, leaning closer. The faint chemical smell still clinging to his skin made her eyes water. This is nerve agent exposure. She'd seen similar injuries during her volunteer rotation in conflict zones, medics brought in after chemical attacks. Her pulse quickened. This man wasn't some random civilian. The tactical boots, the military-grade watch, still strapped to his wrist. The way his muscles were defined like someone who lived in a gym he was a soldier. "Start 2 large-bore IVs, wide open," Aurelia ordered, her voice steady despite the alarm bells screaming in her head. "Get me a full talk screen and prep for aggressive chelation therapy. We need..." "Nurse Rosario." The voice cut through the controlled chaos like a blade through silk. Aurelia turned to see Dr. Harrison Whitmore striding into the trauma bay, his white coat immaculate, his expression carved from granite. The medical director moved with the confidence of someone who measured human life in insurance codes and liability exposure. "Dr. Whitmore," Aurelia acknowledged, turning back to her patient. "We've got a critical case here. Possible nerve agent exposure with systemic shock. I can see what we have." Whitmore's voice was ice. He glanced at his tablet, scrolling through the preliminary data. No identification. No insurance verification. No emergency contact. No medical history. He looked at the patient's worn boots sitting in the corner. "This is a vagrant who wandered too close to some industrial chemicals. We are not equipped to handle indigent cases during peak hours." Aurelia's hands stilled on the IV line. She turned slowly, meeting Whitmore's gaze. "Sir, this man is dying. His organs are shutting down. These aren't accidental chemical burns. Someone did this to him. He needs immediate treatment." "What he needs," Whitmore said, stepping closer and lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper, "is to be transferred to County General. We have 3 ambulances in queue, Rosario, real patients with real insurance. I will not have this hospital's resources drained by some homeless veteran who probably got into a fight at a meth lab." "He's a patient," Aurelia said firmly, her jaw tightening. "And I think he's military, special operations based on the scarring. That's a unit tattoo on his forearm. I don't care if he's the Joint Chief of Staff." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You have 30 minutes to stabilize him for transport. If he's still in this bay when I return, you'll be joining him outside this hospital, permanently." The medical director turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Aurelia standing over the unconscious soldier, her mind racing and her heart pounding with a choice that would change everything. Aurelia watched the clock tick past 2:15 a.m. as Whitmore's footsteps faded down the corridor toward his office. She looked down at the soldier, his chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths. His lips had taken on a bluish tint. The monitors screamed their warnings in urgent beeps, blood pressure still dropping. Oxygen saturation at 87% and falling. 30 minutes. Whitmore had given her 30 minutes to condemn this man to death. She made her decision in less than 3 seconds. Aurelia moved quickly, wheeling the gurney behind the heavy privacy curtains in the corner of Trauma Bay 3, a space normally used for supply overflow. She positioned him where the main desk cameras couldn't see, where Whitmore wouldn't think to look during his cursory rounds. Then she turned to the automated medication dispensary, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. The system rejected her first attempt. Experimental chelation agents and military-grade antitoxins required director authorization. She tried again, using an override code she'd learned from a physician friend during a mass casualty drill. The screen flashed red twice before finally blinking green. Access granted. Emergency protocols activated. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the vials from the locked drawer: pralidoxime chloride, atropine sulfate, and a newer compound she'd only read about in medical journals from combat zones. The combination was aggressive, potentially dangerous if she'd misread the symptoms. But doing nothing was guaranteed death. "Forgive me if I'm wrong," she whispered, drawing up the first syringe. She administered the antitoxin slowly, watching his face for any reaction. For 30 agonizing seconds, nothing changed. Then his breathing deepened. His oxygen saturation ticked upward. 89, 91, 93. Aurelia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She sat beside him for the next 4 hours, monitoring every fluctuation, adjusting dosages, sponging his forehead as his fever raged and broke. Other nurses covered her patients without questions, understanding something unspoken was happening behind those curtains. At 6:12 a.m., his eyes opened, sharp, gray, focused despite the trauma his body had endured. "Where?" His voice was gravel scraping stone. "St. Michael's Hospital. You were poisoned." Aurelia poured water into a cup. "I'm Aurelia. I've got you." The soldier studied her with unsettling intensity, as if memorizing every detail. "You broke protocol." "For me." Before she could answer, the curtain exploded open with a violent screech of metal rings. Dr. Whitmore stood there, his face purple with rage. Behind him, 2 security guards and what looked like half the administrative staff crowded the entrance to the trauma bay. "I warned you." "Rosario." Whitmore's voice echoed through the entire emergency department, drawing stares from every corner. "You stole restricted medications. You falsified dispensary records. You deliberately defied a direct order from the medical director of this institution." Aurelia stood, placing herself between Whitmore and the patient. "He was dying. The treatment worked. Look at his vitals. He's stable now. I don't care if you performed a miracle." Whitmore's spit flew with each word. "You committed theft. You violated hospital policy. You endangered this institution's liability protection." He pointed a shaking finger at her badge. "You're terminated. Security will escort you from the premises immediately." The emergency department had gone silent. Nurses, residents, patients in the waiting room, everyone watched as Aurelia slowly unclipped her badge. She removed her father's stethoscope from around her neck, the leather worn smooth from 2 decades of service, first by him, then by her. She placed it gently on the bedside table. "Don't let them move you yet," she said quietly to the soldier. "Stay strong." The soldier's hand moved under the blanket, fingers tapping a rhythm against his thigh dots and dashes. She realized, Morse code, but his eyes never left Whitmore's face, cold and calculating as a predator marking prey. "Get out of my hospital," Whitmore shouted. Aurelia walked through the silent emergency department, past colleagues who wouldn't meet her eyes, past patients who'd watched her public destruction. She pushed through the automatic doors into the cold morning rain, her career and her purpose left behind in a trauma bay that no longer belonged to her. The rain had soaked through Aurelia's scrubs by the time she reached the 3rd block from St. Michael's. Her nursing clogs squelched with each step, water pooling in the worn rubber soles. She clutched the soggy cardboard box against her chest, trying to shield the cracked photo of her father from further damage. The morning traffic was building, commuters in warm cars passing her with barely a glance at the drenched woman walking along the shoulder in hospital scrubs. Her mind spiraled through the implications of what had just happened. Terminated for insubordination and theft. Those words would follow her everywhere. No hospital would touch her. The state licensing board would launch an investigation. She'd spent 8 years building a career, a reputation, a purpose, and it was gone in one shift because she refused to let a man die. She wiped rain from her eyes, or maybe it was tears. She couldn't tell anymore. The sound hit her first, a deep, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through her chest cavity like a second heartbeat. Aurelia stopped, looking up through the rain. Her breath caught. A military helicopter was descending toward Street Michael's parking lot, its dark silhouette cutting through the gray morning sky. The rotor wash turned the drizzle into a horizontal storm, bending trees along the street. Cars slowed, drivers pulling over to stare. People emerged from the hospital entrance, shielding their faces from the debris swirling through the air. This wasn't a medical transport. This was a military operation. Behind her, Aurelia heard the screech of tires. She spun around to see 2 black SUVs skidding to a stop on the wet pavement. Doors flew open and soldiers poured out in full tactical gear, weapons at low ready but not aimed. They moved with precision, establishing a perimeter around her in seconds. "Aurelia Rosario?" The voice cut through the helicopter noise like a command from God himself. The man who stepped forward wore a uniform marked with silver eagles and enough ribbons to tell a story of wars fought in places most people couldn't find on a map. His face was all hard angles and stress lines, weathered by sun and decisions that cost lives. His name tape read Castellanos. His eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "I'm Aurelia," she managed, her voice barely audible over the rotor wash. Commander Castellanos closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Nurse Rosario, I'm Commander Victor Castellanos, Special Operations Command. The man you saved in that hospital is Lieutenant Marcus Reyes, my second in command. You administered an experimental antitoxin protocol that's currently the only thing keeping him alive." "I was fired," Aurelia said numbly. "Dr. Whitmore terminated me. I can't." "Dr. Whitmore's authority ended 60 seconds ago." Castellanos pulled a document from inside his jacket, protected in a waterproof sleeve. Rain beaded off the plastic as he held it up. "This is a federal conscription order signed by the Secretary of Defense at 0645 hours this morning. Street Michael's Hospital is now operating under Department of Defense jurisdiction for all matters relating to Lieutenant Reyes. You're not fired, Nurse Rosario. You're commissioned." Aurelia stared at the document, her exhausted mind struggling to process the words. "I don't understand. Why would?" "Because Lieutenant Reyes was poisoned," Castellanos interrupted, his voice dropping to steel. 3 days ago, his team raided a laboratory producing weaponized nerve agents for foreign buyers. He was exposed during extraction. Someone wanted him dead before he could report what he found. His jaw clenched. "Someone inside your hospital was paid to make sure he didn't survive the night." The implication crashed over Aurelia like ice water. "Whitmore. He knew. He wanted Reyes transferred because dead men don't testify." Castellanos gestured toward the helicopter, its rotors still spinning. "Lieutenant Reyes is asking for you. He's conscious but deteriorating. Will you help us finish what you started?" Aurelia looked at the cracked photo in her waterlogged box, her father's face barely visible through the shattered glass. She thought about his last words to her before the cancer took him. "Courage isn't fearlessness, Mija. It's doing the right thing when everything tells you to run." She dropped the cardboard box onto the wet sidewalk. "Let's go save your lieutenant, Commander. But if we're walking back into that hospital, we're walking into an ambush." Castellanos smiled grimly, his hand resting on the sidearm at his hip. "I'm counting on it." The automatic doors of Street Michael's emergency department slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and the entire waiting room fell silent. Aurelia walked through, flanked by Commander Castellanos on her right, and 4 armed soldiers in full tactical gear forming a protective box around her. Her scrubs were still soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, but she moved with her spine straight and her head high. Every eye in the emergency department tracked their movement. Nurses froze mid-stride. Patients lowered their phones. The security guard who'd escorted Aurelia out 20 minutes earlier took one look at the soldiers and stepped quickly aside, his hand moving away from his radio. Dr. Harrison Whitmore emerged from the administrative corridor, his tablet in hand, already opening his mouth to issue orders. The words died on his lips when he saw Aurelia. His face cycled through confusion, then anger, then something approaching fear as he registered the military presence. "What is the meaning of this?" Whitmore demanded, recovering his composure with visible effort. I've already had security remove this woman from the premises. She was terminated for gross negligence and theft. Dr. Whitmore. Commander Castellanos' voice cut through the emergency department like a blade. He moved forward, his boots clicking against the linoleum with military precision. I'm Commander Victor Castellanos, United States Special Operations Command. As of 0700 hours this morning, Street, Michael's Hospital has been placed under federal jurisdiction pursuant to National Security Presidential Directive 51. Castellanos produced a document folder, snapping it open with practiced efficiency. This facility is now operating as a secured Department of Defense medical installation for matters relating to Lieutenant Marcus Reyes and the ongoing investigation into his attempted assassination. All hospital personnel will comply with military authority or face federal obstruction charges. The blood drained from Whitmore's face. This is absurd. You can't just commandeer a civilian hospital. I can, and I have. Castellanos stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that somehow carried through the entire room. The patient you ordered terminated is a United States military officer who was deliberately poisoned with a weaponized nerve agent. The only reason he's alive right now is because Nurse Rosario defied your orders and administered life-saving treatment. Whitmore's eyes darted to Aurelia, then back to Castellanos. I had no knowledge of any military status. He came in as an unidentified. You had 3 separate notifications from military liaison confirming Lieutenant Reyes' identity and classification. Castellanos pulled out his tablet, tapping the screen. They were sent to your office at 0143, 0156, and 0211 hours. You ignored all 3 and issued a termination order for the nurse trying to save his life. He paused, letting the implication hang. That suggests either criminal incompetence or deliberate conspiracy. Whitmore's jaw worked soundlessly. Around them, the ER staff watched with barely concealed shock and satisfaction. Several nurses exchanged glances that suggested they'd waited years to see their medical director taken down. Nurse Rosario. Castellanos turned to Aurelia, his voice shifting to formal protocol. Under authority granted by the Secretary of Defense, you are hereby commissioned as a civilian medical contractor with GS-13 equivalent rank. You have full medical authority over Lieutenant Reyes and operational command over all hospital resources necessary for his treatment. Your authority supersedes all hospital administration for the duration of this operation. Aurelia felt the weight of every eye in the room. She looked at Whitmore, seeing him truly powerless for the first time. The man who'd built his career on intimidation and bureaucratic cruelty now stood exposed, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. Dr. Whitmore, Aurelia said quietly. You're relieved, Commander. I need access to Lieutenant Reyes immediately. If someone inside this hospital tried to kill him once, they'll try again. Castellanos nodded sharply. Agreed. We've established a secure perimeter around Trauma Bay 3, but I want you to assess his condition personally. He gestured to his soldiers. Sergeant Kovac, Corporal Chen, you're with Nurse Rosario. No one enters that bay without her authorization. Aurelia moved past Whitmore without another glance, the soldiers falling into formation around her. Behind her, she heard Castellanos' voice, cold and final. Dr. Whitmore, you'll remain available for questioning. Don't leave the building. Aurelia pushed through the privacy curtains of Trauma Bay 3, her trained eyes immediately scanning the monitors. Lieutenant Reyes was conscious, but deteriorating. His skin pale beneath the sheen of sweat. His breathing labored despite the oxygen mask. The antitoxin protocol she'd administered had bought him time, but it wasn't enough. Something was still attacking his system from the inside. Lieutenant. She moved to his bedside, checking his pupils with a penlight. I'm Aurelia. I need you to tell me everything about the exposure. What were you raiding? Reyes's gray eyes focused on her with effort. Underground lab. Producing modified organophosphates for export. His voice was rough gravel. My team breached the facility. I got hit with aerosolized compound during extraction. Thought it was standard nerve agent, but it's not. Aurelia pulled up his latest blood work on the monitor, her mind racing through the patterns. The toxicology screen showed elevated cholinesterase inhibition, consistent with nerve agent exposure. But something else. Was there a secondary signature hiding beneath the obvious markers? She turned to Sergeant Kovac, the soldier Castellanos had assigned to her. I need access to military medical databases. Whatever hit Lieutenant Reyes isn't in civilian records. Kovac handed her a tablet with encrypted access. Commander cleared you for classified medical archives. What are you looking for? Something that doesn't exist. Aurelia's fingers flew across the screen, cross-referencing Reyes's symptoms with known chemical weapons signatures. Standard organophosphates caused predictable degradation patterns. Reyes's blood showed something different, a cascading cellular failure that mimicked septic shock almost perfectly. Almost. This isn't accidental exposure, Aurelia said, her voice tight. This is designer assassination. Someone created a synthetic nerve toxin that presents as septic infection. Any normal ER doctor would treat it as sepsis, pump him full of antibiotics and fluids, and watch him die anyway. She looked at Reyes, understanding dawning cold in her chest. The antitoxin I gave you slowed it down, but it's still replicating. Whatever you found in that lab, someone wants you dead before you can testify about it. Reyes's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. The lab. We found shipping manifests, military-grade weapons going to foreign buyers through a civilian medical supply chain. His breathing grew more ragged. Someone in the States is facilitating high-level access to hospital networks. Whitmore's name was on the encrypted server. The pieces clicked together with brutal clarity. Whitmore wasn't just denying you treatment out of bureaucratic cruelty. He was ensuring you died before you could expose the network. Aurelia turned to Kovac. We need Commander Castellanos now. And we need to lock down this hospital. If Whitmore knows we've figured this out, he'll send someone to finish the job. As if summoned by her words, the lights in Trauma Bay 3 flickered once, then died. Emergency backup lights kicked in, bathing everything in eerie red. Through the curtain, Aurelia heard confused voices, then shouting. Kovac's radio crackled. All units, we have a security breach. Unknown hostile in the building. Repeat, active threat inside Street Michaels. The transmission cut off with a burst of static. Reyes tried to sit up, his face contorted with pain. Aurelia. They're coming for me. You need to get out. I'm not leaving you. Aurelia grabbed the crash cart, wheeling it to block the entrance to the bay. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. Kovac, can you defend this position? The sergeant checked his weapon, his face grim. Against how many? Through the curtain, they heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not running like hospital staff would during a power outage. These footsteps belonged to someone hunting. However many it takes, Aurelia whispered, positioning herself between Reyes and the curtain. She grabbed a scalpel from the surgical tray, the small blade suddenly feeling both inadequate and necessary. Because that man in that bed is the only witness who can bring down an entire conspiracy, and I'll be damned if I let him die now. The footsteps stopped just outside the curtain. Then the lights went out completely. The emergency backup lights flickered back on, casting everything in blood-red shadows. Aurelia's grip tightened on the scalpel as the curtain rustled. A figure stepped through, wearing a white coat and surgical mask, a medical badge clipped to the pocket. The badge photo showed a middle-aged man with graying hair. The man wearing it was younger, his eyes too cold, his movements too controlled. I'm Dr. Morrison from toxicology, the man said, his voice professionally neutral. I've been called to consult on the nerve agent case. Aurelia's eyes dropped to his badge. Street Michael's toxicology department didn't have a Dr. Morrison. More damning. The badge format was wrong. The color coding hadn't been updated since last year's security overhaul. This badge was a forgery, and not even a current one. Sergeant Kovac, Aurelia said quietly, not taking her eyes off the intruder. Check his credentials. The fake doctor's hand moved toward his coat pocket. Kovac's weapon came up instantly. Hands where I can see them. Now, the man's professional mask slipped. His hand completed its movement with inhuman speed, pulling a syringe filled with amber liquid. He lunged toward Reyes's IV line. Kovac fired, but the assassin twisted, taking the round in his shoulder without slowing. He crashed into the sergeant, driving him against the wall with brutal efficiency. Aurelia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the defibrillator from the crash cart, ripping the paddles free and charging it in one fluid motion. The machine whined as capacitors built voltage. The assassin kicked Kovac's weapon away and turned toward Reyes, syringe raised. Clear! Aurelia shouted, more from instinct than necessity. She slammed both paddles against the assassin's back and triggered the discharge. 300 joules of electricity arced through his body. The man convulsed, his spine arching unnaturally as every muscle contracted simultaneously. The syringe flew from his hand, shattering against the floor and releasing its lethal contents in a spreading amber pool. The assassin collapsed, smoke rising from the contact points on his coat. Aurelia stood over him, paddles still charged, her chest heaving. Kovac recovered his weapon, blood streaming from a split lip, and trained it on the motionless figure. "Jesus Christ," Kovac breathed. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Volunteer work in conflict zones." Aurelia's hands shook as she returned the paddles to the cart. "You learned to improvise." She looked at the shattered syringe, her medical training analyzing even through the adrenaline. "That compound would have killed him in 30 seconds. Made it look like cardiac arrest from the nerve toxin." Kovac grabbed his radio. "Commander, we have one hostile down in Trauma Bay 3. Nurse Rosario just saved Lieutenant Reyes with a defibrillator. We need a secure extraction immediately. The hospital is compromised." Castellanos' voice crackled back. "Copy that. I'm mobilizing full tactical response. Get Reyes mobile. We're evacuating to Blackridge Medical Facility within 10 minutes. Rosario goes with him." Aurelia knelt beside Reyes, checking his vitals. His gray eyes were wide, alert despite his weakened state. "You just killed a man with a defibrillator." "I incapacitated him," Aurelia corrected, though she wasn't entirely sure the distinction mattered. "Can you travel?" "I can barely breathe," Reyes admitted. "But I'd rather die in transit than waiting here for the next killer." He gripped her hand. "Thank you." Again, Kovac was already breaking down the IV setup for transport. Through the curtain, Aurelia heard running footsteps multiple sets, moving with military coordination. Castellanos burst through with 4 more soldiers, their weapons raised. "Package secure?" the commander demanded. "For now." Aurelia helped disconnect Reyes' remaining monitors. "But Commander, if they sent one assassin, they'll send more. And if Whitmore is coordinating from inside this hospital, Whitmore is gone." Castellanos' face was granite. "His office is empty. Security footage shows him leaving through the loading dock 12 minutes ago. He's in the wind, which means this conspiracy goes deeper than we thought." He turned to his team. "Get Lieutenant Reyes in the transport. Nurse Rosario, you're with us." "We move now." As soldiers lifted Reyes onto a stretcher, Aurelia looked down at the unconscious assassin, then at the shattered syringe still pooling on the floor. Someone had sent a trained killer into a hospital to finish what poison had started. And whoever that someone was, they had resources, access, and absolutely no hesitation about killing anyone who stood in their way, including her. The helicopter lifted off from Street Michael's parking lot at 0847 hours, rotors slicing through morning fog that had rolled in from the coast. Aurelia sat beside Reyes' stretcher, monitoring his vitals on a portable medical unit while the aircraft banked hard to the east. Through the open door, she watched the hospital shrink to a toy-sized building, then disappear entirely into the gray mist. Commander Castellanos sat across from her, his tactical headset alive with radio chatter. "Blackridge Medical is 40 minutes northeast. It's a classified military treatment facility built into the mountains. Completely secure. Staff vetted through DoD clearance. Once we're there, Reyes can testify, and you can treat him without looking over your shoulder." "What about Whitmore?" Aurelia had to shout over the rotor noise. "Federal agents are already executing warrants on his home, office, and financial records. He won't get far." Castellanos' jaw tightened. "But I'm more concerned about who he's working for. You don't get access to weaponized nerve agents and trained assassins without serious backing." The flight was smooth until they crossed into the mountain range. Aurelia felt the helicopter shift, the pilot's voice tense through the intercom. "Commander, I'm picking up a signal. Someone's pinging us. Active tracking." Castellanos moved to the cockpit, his expression darkening. When he returned, the easy confidence had been replaced by tactical calculation. "We're being followed. 2 vehicles on the mountain access road below us, moving fast to intercept our landing zone." "How?" Aurelia demanded. "This was supposed to be a secure extraction." Kovac was already running a detection sweep over their equipment. The electronic wand chirped urgently as it passed over Reyes' stretcher. The sergeant dropped to his knees, running his hands along the underside of the frame. His fingers found something, and he ripped it free, a small black device, no larger than a coin, its LED blinking red. "GPS tracker, military grade." Kovac crushed it under his boot. "Someone planted this before we left the hospital." Aurelia's blood ran cold. which means they know exactly where we are and where we're going. Castellanos grabbed the intercom. Alpha 2, this is Alpha Actual. Black Ridge is compromised. Divert to contingency site Bravo, the safe house at coordinates November 7 Echo. He turned to his team. We're going dark. Full combat protocols. The helicopter banked sharply, changing course. Below them, through breaks in the fog, Aurelia could see 2 black SUVs racing along the mountain road, trying to keep pace. One of them swerved onto a logging trail, taking a more direct route toward their new destination. They're cutting us off, the pilot reported. ETA to Safe House Bravo is 12 minutes. Those vehicles will be there in 10. Reyes struggled to sit up, his face pale but determined. Commander, you need to leave me. Take Aurelia and extract. I'm slowing you down. Negative. Castellanos checked his weapon with mechanical precision. We don't leave people behind. We're all getting to that safe house, and we're all getting out alive. He looked at Aurelia. Can he survive rough handling? Aurelia checked Reyes's vitals. His oxygen saturation was dropping, the toxin still working through his system despite her treatments. He needs surgery within the next 6 hours, or the nerve damage becomes permanent. But he can handle movement. Good. Castellanos moved to the door, scanning the terrain below. Because we're about to get into a firefight, and I need you focused on keeping him breathing while we handle the welcome party. The helicopter descended through the fog toward a small clearing. Aurelia could see the safe house now, a fortified cabin built into the mountainside, isolated and defensible. She could also see the black SUVs converging on the same location, kicking up dust as they raced through the forest. The pilot's voice was grim. Touchdown in 60 seconds. Hostiles arriving in 90. This is going to be close. Aurelia gripped Reyes's hand as the helicopter dropped toward the landing zone. Through the open door, she watched armed figures emerging from the SUVs, taking positions in the tree line. They weren't running away. They were setting up an ambush. Welcome to Black Ridge, Castellanos said, chambering around. Hope you're ready for this, Nurse Rosario. Aurelia thought about her father, about the oath she'd taken, about the line between healer and warrior. I didn't come this far to quit now, Commander. The helicopter's skids touched Earth, and all hell broke loose. The first bullet shattered the helicopter's windscreen before the skids fully settled. Glass exploded inward as Castellanos and his team returned fire, laying down suppressive bursts while dragging Reyes's stretcher toward the safe house. Aurelia ran beside them, her body bent low, medical bag clutched against her chest as rounds cracked through the air above her head. They made it through the reinforced door as wood splinters erupted from the frame. Kovacs slammed it shut, throwing the heavy bolt while bullets punched through the outer walls, sending dust cascading from the rafters. The safe house was built for exactly this scenario. Concrete reinforced walls, limited entry points, a medical bay in the basement. But it was designed for temporary refuge, not sustained siege. Get him downstairs, Castellanos shouted over the gunfire. Aurelia, you've got whatever you need in that med bay. Keep him alive. 2 soldiers carried Reyes down the narrow stairwell into the basement. The medical bay was surprisingly well-equipped surgical tools, anesthesia, monitoring equipment, all designed for emergency field operations. Aurelia's hands moved on autopilot, setting up the space while above her the firefight intensified. The ceiling shook with each impact. Dust rained down onto the sterile surfaces. She cut away Reyes's remaining clothing, exposing the full extent of the nerve toxin's damage. His breathing was shallow, labored. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor. The chemical burns across his chest were necrotizing, spreading cellular death through surrounding tissue. She had hours at most before the toxin reached his heart. I need to debride the damaged tissue and deliver chelation agents directly to the affected areas, Aurelia said to Corporal Chen, who'd been assigned to assist her. That means surgery. Now, while people are actively trying to kill us, then we better work fast. Chen had clearly done field medicine before. He was already prepping the anesthesia without being asked. Above them, the gunfire reached a crescendo. Aurelia heard Castellanos shouting orders, the distinctive crack of assault rifles, and then an explosion that shook the entire structure. The lights flickered but held. Emergency power, Aurelia realized. They'd blown the main transformer. She made the first incision just as a bullet punched through the ceiling, embedding itself in the concrete wall 3 feet from Reyes's head. Her hand didn't waver. 8 years in emergency medicine, 2 tours volunteering in war zones, her body knew how to separate the crisis happening around her from the crisis on her operating table. "Scalpel," she said calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Chen handed her instruments with steady precision. Together they worked through the damaged tissue, removing necrotic sections, while delivering concentrated chelation compounds to bind and neutralize the remaining toxin. Every few minutes, the building shuddered from impacts. Aurelia heard shouting, more explosions, the distinctive report of a sniper rifle from the upper floor. Reyes's vitals wavered on the monitor. His heart rate spiked, then dropped dangerously low. "He's crashing," Chen warned. "Not on my watch." Aurelia injected epinephrine directly into Reyes's chest cavity, her movements controlled despite the chaos. "Come on, Lieutenant. You don't get to die after everything we've been through." The monitor flatlined for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the rhythm returned, weak but steady. Castellanos' voice crackled through Chen's radio. "How much longer?" "We're running low on ammunition, and they're bringing up heavy weapons." Chen looked at Aurelia. She was elbow-deep in Reyes's chest cavity, trying to repair damage while the building fell apart around them. 30 minutes minimum." "We don't have 30 minutes, Castellanos replied, his voice tight with stress. "They're preparing to breach." "Can he be moved?" Aurelia looked at her patient, at the surgical field she'd created, at the monitors showing vitals that would crash the moment she stopped. Moving him now meant death. Staying meant they'd all die together when the mercenaries broke through. "No," she said firmly. "He can't be moved, so you need to hold that line, Commander, because I'm not finished saving his life." Another explosion rocked the building. Somewhere above, glass shattered and men screamed. But in the basement medical bay, Aurelia Rosario continued her surgery, her hands steady, her focus absolute, betting everything that Castellanos and his team could give her the time she desperately. 3 weeks after the siege at Blackridge, Aurelia stood in the observation gallery of a military tribunal chamber, watching Lieutenant Marcus Reyes walk to the witness stand without assistance. His recovery had been remarkable. The nerve damage she'd repaired during surgery had healed cleanly. The toxin was purged from his system. He wore his dress uniform with the bearing of a soldier who'd looked death in the face and walked away unimpressed. The tribunal panel consisted of 3 generals and 2 civilian oversight officials. The gallery was packed with military brass, federal prosecutors, and journalists who'd been allowed limited access to the proceedings. At the defense table, flanked by federal marshals, sat Dr. Harrison Whitmore. His expensive suit couldn't hide the hollow-eyed exhaustion of a man who'd been running for 3 weeks before the FBI finally cornered him at a private airfield, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. "Lieutenant Reyes," the presiding general began, "please state for the record what you discovered during Operation Nightfall." Reyes's voice was steady, amplified through the chamber's sound system. "On October 28th, my team raided an underground laboratory in the industrial district, producing weaponized chemical agents. We seized 3 servers containing encrypted files. Military intelligence decoded them within 48 hours. He turned to look directly at Whitmore. Those files contained shipping manifests showing military-grade nerve agents being distributed through civilian medical supply chains. The orders were placed using credentials stolen from Department of Defense medical facilities. The tribunal attorney projected documents onto the large screen behind the witness stand. Aurelia recognized Whitmore's digital signature on dozens of purchase orders, requisition forms, and encrypted communications with foreign buyers. The investigation revealed that Dr. Whitmore had been selling access to classified military medical data for 18 months, Reyes continued. When my team seized evidence linking him to the weapons trafficking network, he arranged for me to be exposed to a synthetic nerve toxin designed to mimic septic shock. The plan was simple. I'd die of what appeared to be natural complications from the raid, and the conspiracy would remain buried. Whitmore's attorney stood. "Objection. This is speculation without... I have documentation." Aurelia's voice cut through the chamber as she stood in the gallery. All eyes turned toward her. The presiding general gestured for her to approach. She walked to the evidence table, placing a thick binder before the tribunal. "This is Lieutenant Reyes's complete medical record from Street. Michael's hospital, including toxicology reports, treatment protocols, and time-stamped communications between Dr. Whitmore and the hospital administration." She opened to a marked page. These communications show Dr. Whitmore received 3 separate notifications of Lieutenant Reyes's military status and classification level. He ignored all 3, and issued orders for termination of treatment. The attorney projected the communications. The timestamps were damning. Whitmore had known exactly who Reyes was and had deliberately condemned him to death. Furthermore, Aurelia continued, pulling out a second file. This is the chemical analysis of the compound used on Lieutenant Reyes. It's a designer toxin not found in any civilian database. Its signature matches compounds referenced in the seized server files compounds that Dr. Whitmore had requisitioned through falsified military medical orders 6 months prior. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Whitmore's face had gone gray, his attorney frantically whispering in his ear. The presiding general raised his hand for silence. Dr. Whitmore, in light of this evidence and Lieutenant Reyes's testimony, this tribunal finds sufficient cause for criminal proceedings. You are hereby remanded into federal custody on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, treason, trafficking of weapons of mass destruction, and violation of the Espionage Act. Federal marshals moved forward. Whitmore stood slowly, his legs barely supporting him. As they led him past Aurelia, he stopped, his voice barely a whisper. You destroyed me over one patient. Aurelia met his eyes without flinching. No, Dr. Whitmore. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided some lives were worth more than others. As cameras flashed and reporters surged forward, Commander Castellanos appeared at Aurelia's side. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you. There's a position opening as Chief Medical Officer for Special Operations. Interested? Aurelia looked at Reyes, who stood at attention before the tribunal, alive because she'd refused to abandon him. She thought about her father, about the oath she'd taken, about the difference one person's courage could make. When do I start, Commander?